Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories.
A huge liner sets sail across the Atlantic. The immaculate vessel is one of the fastest, reliable, and luxury ships of its time. There are almost 2,000 people on board, from poor third-class passengers to well-known representatives of the American and European elite. For most of them, this will be the last voyage. A giant unsinkable liner will go underwater, taking with it more than 1,000 lives, on the calendar of the mid-10th years of the 20th century. This is not the story of the Titanic. Not a single word said, not a single archive frame shown has anything to do with the most famous shipwreck. Moreover, the infamous fame of the Titanic is probably one of the reasons why many have not even heard about the disaster, which I will tell you about in this video. The wreck of the Lusitania ship is no less dramatic, and in some sense scarier, than the story sung by the famous Hollywood film. The passengers of the Titanic did not suspect anything about the iceberg of the imperfect design of the ship, and the lack of the necessary number of lifeboats. Some of those who boarded Lusitania before the fatal voyage knew that they were in mortal danger. The shipwreck of the Titanic occurred in 1912, a worldwide event. After that, many safety measures and regulations on ships were revised. However, just 3 years later, the tragedy of Lusitania happened. The number of victims exceeded 1,000. Most of them have never been found. At the same time, there were enough boats on the ship. Its design was tested by 200 flights across the Atlantic, and large blocks of ice bypassed the ship. So what happened? This is the story of the Lusitania crash. If you haven't heard anything about the wreck of the Lusitania ship, this will be a fascinating video. If you know in general terms what happened, then it will be even more interesting for you. Because I will also tell you a lot of little-known details that make this story truly epic. Titanic was mentioned many times in the introduction. There is indeed a lot in common between the two disasters. However, if you dig a little deeper, it turns out that these are absolutely two different stories. But this is me getting ahead of myself a little bit. Let's talk about everything in order. The end of April 1915. There is a giant liner towering in the port of New York. This is Lusitania. There is a lively preparation going on the ship. In a few days, it sets off on another transatlantic voyage. Hundreds of personnel clean cabins, make beds and check ventilation, fill warehouses with food, alcohol and cigars. Everything is in order for a week-long trip to be a pleasure, even for the most demanding passengers. Speed is one of the main features of Lusitania. It's only 7 days from New York to British Liverpool. At that time, in 1915, it was the fastest passenger ship in the world. Speed had its price. The ship burned 1,000 tons of coal per day of sailing. Such volumes were necessary not only to drive powerful turbines and engines, but also to maintain the operation of the rest of the ship's systems, from elevators to 6,000 light bulbs. Comfort and speed are not the only priorities of the British company Cunard, which owns Lusitania. A few years earlier, a rival shipping company had lost the Titanic. The tragedy claimed almost 1,500 lives and changed many safety rules of civil navigation. There were more than enough lifeboats and vests on board the Lusitania to make each of the nearly 1,300 passengers and 700 crew feel absolutely safe. The reputation of the Cunard company at that time was almost perfect. Not a single passenger died due to the fault of the carrier. Victims during flights, of course, happened, but they were caused by natural causes, as a rule, among elderly passengers. The same can be said about the Lusitania ship itself. On the 1st of May, 1915, it should set off on its 202nd voyage across the Atlantic. No serious incidents have occurred during the 8 years of operation of the liner. A big ship needs a good captain. At the Cunard Company, 58-year-old William Turner was considered the best in the management of ocean liners. 5 years earlier, he had set a record for the fastest transatlantic journey on the sister ship Lusitania. He went through a career path from cabin boy to managing the main passenger liners. Along the way, Turner had a couple of minor accidents, but similar things happened to all captains, even the best. Another interesting fact speaks about the reputation of the Lusitania captain. A few days before the last flight of the liner, Turner testified in court. Relatives of the Americans who died on the Titanic tried to get a large compensation from the owners of the ship, the White Star Company. William Turner was attracted by the lawyers of the injured party as an expert. In 1912, he operated the liner Mauretania and crossed the Atlantic 2 days after the Titanic. Having received a message about icebergs at that time, Turner corrected the route and stated in court that, in his opinion, the captain of the Titanic made a mistake passing through the region with icebergs at high speed. In a word, representatives of the middle-class elite and the more modest passengers of Lusitania could be confident in their captain and his ship. Of the nearly 1,300 ticket holders, the vast majority are more than 900 British, about 200 Americans, and in third place in terms of the number given to the Russian Empire. 70 people. The 1st of May 1915. The main event of the day in New York is the departure of the Lusitania liner. Passengers, their relatives and acquaintances, ordinary onlookers, and representatives of the press gather at the port to escort the ship. These are still the days when the departure of large ships became an important event, partly because of the status of travelers from the first class. Among the rich and famous passengers, the richest and most famous Alfred Vanderbilt, the young heir of the incredibly wealthy American dynasty. Alfred is also known for being a member of the elite club of unprecedented luck. Along with J.P. Morgan, Theodore Dreiser, and other important personalities, he changed his mind at the last moment to sail on the Titanic. This time, Vanderbilt still goes on board the ship. He rents one of the most luxurious cabins on Lusitania, worth several tens of thousands of dollars in modern money. Among the passengers of celebrities, one of the most hype writers of America of that period, Albert Hubbard, can also be noted. He travels with his wife. A wealthy developer, the Order of Hammond, is also traveling with his wife. For the famous bookseller Charles Lariat, this is a business trip. He is bringing for a client in London a rare edition of a Dickens novel and several valuable drawings for this edition. In times without the internet and television, book trading was a lucrative business, and valuable publications could cost a fortune. Both in the first and in other classes, there are many families with children. In total, about 100 small passengers depart on Lusitania on the 1st of May. Shortly before the ship is due to begin its voyage, several dozen passengers of the Cameroonian ship are transferred to it, the flight of which was cancelled. The newcomers are mostly happy about the replacement, Lusitania, a luxury vessel. Everything from cabins to public spaces and menus surpasses most existing passenger ships. After a short delay due to an unexpected replenishment, the liner still departs. Passengers cheerfully wave at the camera and people on the shore. The atmosphere of the holiday is mixed with thick smoke coming out of the giant pipes of the liner. The only thing that darkens the mood of some Lusitania passengers is an ad in the newspaper. As an advertisement, the German embassy in the United States posted a warning. Germany declared the area around the British Isles a military zone and warned that all ships flying the flag of Britain and its allies could be attacked. The fact is that for almost a year there has been a big war in Europe. At the beginning of the summer of 1914, Europe lived a quiet, peaceful life. Newspapers printed gossip columns about the upcoming vacation plans of representatives of royal families and the aristocracy. Everyone seemed to have no time for the war. The prerequisites for a certain crisis have been accumulating for many years. Conflicts of interest in different parts of Europe, strained relations, and a kind of arms race between Britain and Germany. But at the same time, not only ordinary people, but also many representatives of the authorities of European powers naively believed that it would not come to a real clash. It seemed that such times were long gone, that economic and cultural ties between the countries were too tight to allow a big war. History had a different opinion. At the end of June of the 14th year, the Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand was killed in Sarajevo. This event was the formal beginning of a global world war, which then, due to inexperience, no one had yet called the first. You can devote hours to the history of the First World War. In this case, it is important for us to understand only a few things. By the time Lusitania and Sport left for New York in May of the 1915th, things were as follows. The war was already underway in Europe with the participation of many countries. But one of the main opponents were Germany and Britain. The United States has so far remained neutral. That is, formally, the Lusitania passenger liner was going from a peaceful country to the territory of military operations. Was this a surprise for the Lusitania passengers? Of course not. Were they worried about this? Yes, but not critical. The following fact speaks most eloquently about this. The ship was almost filled with people. Only a few cabins in the first class remained vacant. The war lasted not the first day and not the first month. At the same time, passenger liners regularly plied from Britain to the States and back. At the same time, there was already an absolutely real new submarine threat for ships in British waters. Before the beginning of the First World War, few people perceived this as a significant military force. Yet the main calculation was on ships. However, gradually the opinion changed. Submarines were in service with both the British and the Germans. Having destroyed several British warships with the help of submarines at the very beginning of the war, Germany truly realized their potential. Not only could the Germans attack their enemies' warships, they could also destroy cargo ships. For Britain, an island nation, this is very painful. Many necessary goods, including food and weapons, entered the country by sea. Therefore, Germany's decision in the spring of 1915 to declare the waters around Britain a war zone and attack all ships that could somehow help the enemy is quite logical. Cruel and inhuman, but logical. British submarines also did not sit idle. However, unlike the Germans, who often destroyed cargo ships, the British were only engaged in interception. In other words, it seems that the threat to the passengers of Lusitania is obvious. Because formally the Germans threatened not only military and cargo, but also passenger ships. Those could potentially be converted into warships or carry military cargo. Why did only a few people decide at the last moment not to board the ship after reading the warning about submarines in the newspaper? This is a very good question, and there are several answers to it. First of all, there was a kind of unspoken rule of war that it was not necessary to attack ships with civilians. At first, this rule also applied to merchant ships, but during the war, the Germans quickly forgot about it when they began to destroy cargo ships. Secondly, Germany was clearly not interested in sinking a ship with citizens of the United States. This will potentially lead to the withdrawal of America from neutral status, and the Germans will have one more powerful enemy. Thirdly, many Lusitania passengers believed that British military vessels would ensure their safety in British waters. To some extent, the owners of the liner, the British company Cunard, also counted on this. And finally, fourthly, it is difficult to say what the submarines of that period were closer to, two cans or two modern submarines. We will talk in more detail about their design, but for now just one fact is enough. A ship like the Lusitania could accelerate up to 45 kilometers per hour. The maximum speed of an advanced submarine of that period is almost 2 times less. That is, having noticed the submarine, which was not so difficult, the ship could easily sail away from it. Moreover, he even had enough speed to dodge the launched torpedo. In short, neither the employees of the Cunard Company, nor Captain Turner, nor the passengers of the Lusitania, in general, had cause for concern. Against the background of news about submarine attacks, reporters asked passengers questions, for example, before departure. They asked Alfred Vanderbilt if he would be as lucky as the last time with the Titanic. The heir only smiled in response. And Captain Turner, after hearing the conversation, said that Lusitania attacked by a torpedo was the best joke he had heard. However, neither Captain Turner, nor Alfred Vanderbilt, nor the other passengers of the ship, nor journalists, nor representatives of Cunard knew what only a small group of British Secret Service employees, who intercepted messages from German warships and submarines were aware of. The day before the departure of Lusitania on Friday the 30th of April, the German combat submarine U-20 left the port in the northwest of Germany. She was not accompanied by crowds of onlookers and reporters. A routine sortie into British waters began for the submarine. The main goal of the submarine team is to sink as many Allied ships as possible. A frosty Sunday morning in the cold waters surrounding the northern part of Britain. A German submarine is moving towards Faye Island. Walter Schweiger is standing on a raised platform above the conning tower, wearing a cap and a leather raincoat. He's 32, he's Captain U-20. She's a U-boat, she's an Unterseeboot, which literally means submarine in German. Despite his youth, Schweiger is already considered one of the most experienced captains of submarines in Germany. He is one of the few who began serving on submarines even before the war began. In total, the German fleet in the 1915th has a little more than 24 submarines capable of sailing long distances. For a boat, this is a gigantic and extremely imperfect machine. Despite the status of a submarine, these designs could not spend much time directly underwater. In the submerged state, the engine was powered by a battery, and the boat could sail in this way no more than 150 kilometers. At a speed of a maximum of 15 kilometers per hour on the surface of the inlet, there was a diesel engine, and the speed increased in this way almost twice. With this arrangement, the captains of the U-boat could keep up with ordinary cargo ships, but not with high-speed liners like Lusitania. During the voyage, the crew of the German submarine faced many dangers. British warships and traps made of metal nets. 6 months earlier, Schweiger's ship had just fallen into the nets and was close to death. In addition, in the fog, due to limited visibility, the boat could simply collide with any vessel and sink. No less dangerous was the imperfect design of the submarine. In case something goes wrong, the whole team will be at the bottom without the opportunity to surface. The oxygen will run out, and the sailors will suffer a painful death. Being inside the boat during the 2-week voyage was a serious test. The vast majority of the 70-meter submarine was occupied by seawater tanks. They were filled and released during diving and surfacing. The crew of 30 people was located in a small room in the central part of the boat. The air inside could be cut. None of the 36 crew members washed during the voyage. There was only one toilet for everyone, which could malfunction and push the contents not inside, but out. A small supply of fresh food quickly deteriorated, and mostly ate canned food. Sometimes the sailors caught fish on the surface and cooked it inside. The already disgusting smell inside was getting even worse. Despite this, the sailors did not have simple human joys alien to them. For example, they had a dog on the boat, and the previous Christmas the team met romantically on board, sinking to the seabed. At a depth of 20 meters, no one could hear their loud songs. Music, wine, good food, deck walks, and small talk. This is how the first few days of Lusitania's voyage pass. Most of the ship's passengers know about the Great War in the center of Europe. They have already read the news about the horrors on the fronts of France, about tens of thousands of dead, and about the suffocating gas used by the Germans on the battlefields. But for many Lusitania passengers, the war is somewhere far away. They are relaxed, they drink wine and eat halibut. Only a few on board the liner are excited. First-class passenger Dwight Harris is carrying a valuable cargo from New York, an expensive wedding ring. He read the ads for submarines in the newspaper shortly before departure. Harris managed to buy a life buoy and took it with him on board the Lusitania. If possible, Captain William Turner calms the worried people. Communication with passengers is a real test for him. A man with a difficult fate, William Turner was withdrawn, and first of all he was interested in the ship and the crew. The captain's impressive naval career had its price. In the process, his wife left him, taking several daughters with her. The captain does not lie to passengers when he says that Lusitania is not afraid of a torpedo attack by a submarine. He is sincerely convinced of this. William Turner has already encountered submarines several times while operating other liners. Then he just used the advantages of an advanced ship in speed, and at full speed, easily escaped from pursuit. The argument that the Germans would not attack a large passenger ship, and even with the Americans, also sounded logical. However, this theory had several problems. First of all, the day before, on the day of departure of Lusitania, not far from the European shores, a German submarine attacked an American cargo ship. Among the victims were us citizens. There was no decisive response from the American President Wilson. Germany has successfully crossed another red line. No one on Lusitania, including the captain, was aware of the incident. Secondly, the Germans had a formal reason to attack the liner. On board the Lusitania, there was a kind of military cargo. Details from which the Allies were to produce rifles and other weapons. By the way, an interesting fact is connected with this. Immediately after Lusitania's departure from New York, several German spies were caught on the ship, sending scouts to passenger ships in order to find out the presence of military cargo. Was a common practice of the German military department. The spies on Lusitania were quickly exposed and imprisoned for the rest of the voyage. So for sure the Germans did not know about the military cargo on the liner. And the third, perhaps the main factor in underestimating what the Germans were capable of was Captain Walter Schweiger. A cold-blooded and cruel man with a license to kill. On the sixth day of the patrol, Walter Schweiger's affairs are going badly. At that moment, his boat sails off the coast of Ireland. After leaving the German port, U-20 did not sink a single vessel, although it made several attempts. In one case, the accumulation of British warships prevented. Another time, Submarina could not keep up with a Danish passenger liner. Finally, the torpedo failed for the third time. In general, torpedoes are the main weapon of submarines. On board the 20, as on other boats of this class, there are only 7 missiles. They are large, heavy, and very expensive to manufacture. Torpedoes are really effective when hitting an enemy vessel. The problem is that in 60% of cases, the torpedo attack failed. It could not start at all, or it could start crookedly and deviate from the desired course. Yes, in addition to torpedoes, the bot had other projectiles at its disposal. However, their power was low, and they posed a threat only to very small vessels. And the captain of the German submarine was not very interested in small-scale production. The success of his patrol depended on the displacement of the sunk ships. The more tone that has sunk to the bottom, the better. On the evening of the 5th of May, Schweiger notices something similar to a cargo ship through a periscope. His assistant determines that it is a British ship carrying stones. A relatively small ship, but taking into account the unsuccessful patrol, it suits the Germans. Schweiger is careful. He knows that a periscope sticking out over the water leaves a noticeable trace that is visible from afar. If the ship detects a white line from the periscope in advance, it will most likely escape from pursuit. U-20 approaches the victim at the required distance. At this moment, the cargo ship notices the submarine and begins to change course abruptly. Schweiger immediately gives the order to open fire, but not with torpedoes. He saves them for mining more. Several shots hit the hull of the ship, an explosion occurs, and the ship begins to sink. Captain Schweiger is watching through a periscope. For him, it's a silent show. There is no sound of an explosion or screams of victims inside the submarine. This partly explains the coolness of many German submarine captains. Although Schweiger, according to the memoirs of some colleagues, stood out with special cruelty. One day, he attacked a large ship with a Red Cross on board. It was a mobile hospital. During the patrol, no one controls the actions of Walter Schweiger. He, like other captains of large German submarines, is the king and god of his ship for most of the route. Communication with the boat is possible only at the very beginning of the journey for about 100 kilometers from the exit point. Then, the command does not control what is happening. The final decision to attack or not to attack the ship is made by the captain of the submarine. A few hours after a successful shot at the cargo ship, Schweiger meets another target. This time, a Norwegian steamer is on its way. And although Norway adheres to neutrality, German captains know that British ships sometimes paint the flag of a neutral country on board. As a disguise, Walter Schweiger decides to attack, this time with a torpedo. After the launch, the sailors of the Norwegian ship notice a rocket moving towards them. The ship turns sharply, but it's too late. At the last moment, the torpedo, for some unknown reason, slightly changes direction and passes directly under the hull of the ship. Schweiger hesitates to make a second attack. He fears that the Norwegian vessel may be armed and will attack in response. The captain gives the order to dive. The sailors of both ships attacked that day transmit to the British Admiralty a message about the submarine and its coordinates. That is, the British department roughly understands the location and direction of movement of the U-20. According to calculations, the boat will be in the waters off the southern coast of Ireland at about the same time as the large passenger liner Lusitania. Lusitania is getting closer to British shores. The ship is due to arrive in Liverpool in a few days. This will happen with a slight delay. The liner is moving a little slower than it could. The war is affecting. The Cunard Company is forced to save resources, and instead of 4 boilers, only 3 work on the ship. And therefore some passengers notice that there is no smoke coming from one pipe of the liner. William Turner receives information about the activity of a German submarine. The British Admiralty at that moment is more preoccupied with the fate of one of its largest warships, which also takes place in this region. In addition, the British Secret Services intercept many messages of the German military, including from submarines. These messages are encrypted, but the British have a German document with codes to decrypt. The British do not want to burn down the fact that they have a secret document to decrypt, and therefore they decide that they will share intercepted information only if absolutely necessary. And the safety of Lusitania does not fall into this category yet. There is another conspiracy theory. It would help the British then, in the 15th year, very much if the United States entered the war on their side. An attack by a German submarine of a large liner with Americans on board could be a good reason for President Wilson to abandon neutrality. But one way or another, William Turner, although aware of the potential danger of German submarines in English waters, does not exactly suspect that the danger is so close. On Thursday, the 6th of May, the Lusitania captain conducts a routine check of the lifeboats. Sailors demonstrate to passengers the procedure of loading into boats in an emergency. The crew is also ordered to put the boats in order. A sailor named Morton is vigorously painting one of the boats. 15-year-old Gwendolini Allen, the daughter of a first-class passenger, approaches him. Gwendolyn asks the sailor to give her a brush to help. Morton lets her paint the boat. In the process, he fears that the girl will get her expensive dress dirty and Morton will get it from the boss. But Gwendolyn does her job neatly and runs away. Thursday becomes the most successful day for Captain Walter Schweiger. With a difference of several hours, he successfully attacks 2 British cargo ships. After that, Schweiger makes the difficult decision to end the patrol. His original plan was to get to here near Liverpool, England, where the concentration of potential targets is much higher. However, by this point, Schweiger already has a large fuel consumption, and he may simply not have enough for the return trip. In the arsenal of U-20, only 3 torpedoes have not been used up. 2 of them, according to the rules, should remain on the way back. In addition, Thursday brings with it thick fog, the most dangerous weather conditions for a submarine. Schweiger is gradually moving towards home. This is the last full day of Lusitania sailing. The ship is due to arrive in Liverpool on Saturday. The night before, William Turner finally received a message from the British Admiralty. Taking into account the coordinates of the last 2 attacks of U-20, Lusitania could very likely have met a German submarine. Turner, overcoming his own introversion, spoke to the passengers. He spoke about the potential threat of German submarines and once again assured people that the Lusitania liner was not in danger. Turner also asked to close and hang the portholes to reduce the visibility of the slider. It was the first evening when the mood of the passengers on the ship was clearly not up to the festive. By the morning of the 7th of May, the fog dissipates. The day promises to be clear and sunny. William Turner receives a new message about the presence of German submarines in the region. However, how much and where is not specifically stated. The captain is not given clear instructions to change course or, for example, temporarily dock in an Irish port. So he continues to move to Liverpool. Passengers can see the passing shores of Ireland in the distance. Despite the captain's announcements the day before, everyone is busy making preparations for arrival. Dwayne Harris takes an expensive ring from the vault and puts it in the inside pocket of his suit. Charles Laureate puts a valuable book with illustrations in his briefcase. One of the passengers at lunch jokes that it would be a crime if a German submarine prevented him from eating dessert. Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Captain Schweiger notices a huge passenger liner. He is extremely surprised that the ship is unaccompanied, given its activity in this region the day before. The ship is too far away. Schweiger believes that it will not be possible to attack the ship, unless, for some reason, the liner slightly changes course. Captain William Turner, due to warnings about submarines, decides to slightly adjust the course and reduces speed. Captain Schweiger sees that the passenger liner is now coming straight towards him. He gives the order to prepare the torpedo. At 2 hours and 10 minutes, the torpedo leaves the submarine and heads for Lusitania, a little more than 30 seconds before the collision with the ship. The next half-minute turns into an eternity for some passengers and the Lusitania crew. Many on board notice an approaching torpedo. In clear weather with a calm sea, it is easy to see how the charge moves underwater. The torpedo produces a slight glow. For a few moments, the passengers lose sight of the projectile. They believe the torpedo missed. Then there is a powerful explosion. Its strength is such that one of the nearest lifeboats is blown to splinters. A hole the size of a small house is formed under the water at the base of the vessel. It is immediately clear that all the team members who were in the inner rooms nearby at that moment were dead or close to it. Due to the low speed of the vessel, water fills the ship through the formed hole very quickly, about 100 tons per second. Everyone who was in the cabins and on deck freezes. Captain Turner descends from the bridge to inspect the damage. 30 seconds later, the next powerful explosion is heard. Due to the fact that everything is developing very quickly, many passengers do not quite understand what is happening, especially those who are higher up in first class and further from the epicenter of the explosion. There, people felt only minor tremors. Some of them continued to have lunch and smoke cigars. Some of the first-class passengers are still aware of the seriousness of the situation. Charles Laureate is standing next to the writer Hubbard and his wife at that moment. Charles tells the couple to run for life jackets. Those in response do not react in any way. They literally froze from misunderstanding. Passengers of the second and third class perceive the situation in a panic. Many grab life jackets and run up the stairs very quickly. Second-class passenger Nora Brederton finds herself in a difficult situation. She was traveling alone with a 3-year-old son and a 1.5-year-old daughter. At the time of the explosion, her daughter was in the children's room on the upper deck, and her son was sleeping in the second-class cabin. On the deck below, Nora herself was on the stairs between the decks. She is trying in a panic to figure out which child she should run after first. As a result, Nora first rushes up after her daughter. Captain Turner is trying to take urgent action. He gives the command to stop the ship so that the lifeboats can be lowered, but the ship does not react. Then the captain decides to turn around abruptly to swim to the nearest Irish coast. However, the liner does not give in. It moves in the opposite direction and moves away from the land more and more. Turner orders the watertight doors to be closed inside to prevent the ship from flooding. One of the passengers on Lusitania is a professional shipbuilder. He tries to calmly explain to another passenger that the torpedo is not terrible, it cannot sink the liner. However, at the moment when the dishes roll off the ship's table due to the tilt, the shipbuilder abruptly gets up and puts on a life jacket. Just 10 minutes after the attack, all the ship's systems are dead, no electricity. Fortunately, unlike the Titanic, Everything happens in clear weather at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Turner sends a message to the Admiralty that the ship has been attacked. Meanwhile, the water fills the vessel with great speed through the explosion hole and open hatches. Gradually, a real panic begins. Passengers can see that the bow of the ship has noticeably tilted down. They don't understand why the order wasn't given to lower the boats. The problem is that it is technically impossible to do this. And because the Lusitania was still moving, and because, due to the tilt of the ship, the boats on one side hung too far to sit in them, and on the other hand, they were pressed closely against the base of the ship. People start jumping into the water. One of them is the Order of Hammond and his wife. Both are wearing life jackets. Hammond floats to the surface of the water, his wife is gone. Some time passes, it still does not appear on the surface. Her body will never be found. One of the passengers pulls out a gun and starts threatening the sailors. They are forced to start lowering a boat full of people down. As a result, the boat breaks down and collides with the base of the ship. Some die immediately from their injuries. Others manage to crawl back onto the ship. There is a new explosion, but the ship tilts so much that water gets on the upper deck. Dwight Harris takes his purchased lifebuoy and jumps into the water with it. In the process, he loses his wedding ring. But Harris manages to stay on the water, and he tries to sail as far as possible from the sinking Lusitania. Only 15 minutes after the attack, Captain Turner realizes that the ship will inevitably sink. He is standing motionless on the bridge in a life jacket and does not take any action. Turner accepted the imminent death and does not resist. Captain U-20 Schweiger watches this terrible picture without sound from the side. He sees women and children jumping from a sinking ship into the water in despair. Not that this justifies Schweiger, but it is worth noting that the second and third explosions were not due to newly launched torpedoes. Apparently, this was due to the fact that the original projectile hit the steam system, which then continued to explode. Anyway, Walter Schweiger definitely considers this patrol a success. Bookseller Laureate grabs briefcases with an expensive edition and runs to one of the boats. Women and children are already sitting there, but the sailor cannot untie the boat. Laureate throws the briefcase into the boat and helps to detach it. However, nothing works out. The boat is close to the bow of the ship, which is already sinking into the water. Laureate sees at that moment how gigantic Lusitania is. The back part gradually rises above the water and hangs in the air, about the same way it happened with the Titanic. Laureate realizes that they will not be able to untie the boat, and soon the ship will drag the boat with it to the bottom. He encourages everyone to jump into the water. He does the same thing himself. His book of drawings, worth a small fortune, goes under the water along with the boat. Nora Bratterton, having picked up her daughter on the upper deck, realizes that she will not have time to go down to the cabin with her 3-year-old son. Then she asks an unfamiliar passenger to take her baby, while she goes down for another one. She barely manages to make her way through the crowd of people on the stairs, run to the cabin, and pick up her son. Climbing up to the deck, she sees a stranger to whom she gave her daughter. However, his hands are empty. His daughter is nowhere to be found. Less than 20 minutes after the attack, the ship sends a SOS signal. The only good news for passengers at that moment is that everything happens in the middle of the day and not at night, as it was with the Titanic. The rest of the horror is difficult to describe in words. The crying and screams of people hang over the water. Out of several dozen lifeboats, only 6 were launched, and not all of them were filled with people. Many who were in the water tried to swim away from the sinking ship as far as possible. They suspected that the giant vessel would begin to suck in everything on the surface. Less than 25 minutes after the attack, Lusitania sinks completely underwater. Soon everything goes quiet. A soft moan of survivors is heard over the water. The British Admiralty receives a SOS signal from Lusitania. In the nearest port in Queenstown, Ireland, there is also a new warship of the British Navy. It takes only an hour to get to the wreck of the Lusitania. However, the ship is forbidden to go to the rescue. The reason is the previous precedent involving one of the German submarines. During a patrol, she shot down a British warship. Another vessel came to the rescue, which was also shot down by a submarine. Finally, a third British ship arrived at the scene, which was also attacked as a result. The command simply forbade the ships to immediately sail to the aid of the ships attacked by submarines. Perhaps if help had arrived at the crash site in an hour, there would have been many more survivors. However, it will take more than 3 hours before that. Most of them spend all this time in the water, surrounded by the wreckage of the ship and the bodies of the dead. Moreover, because of the clear weather, people even see the outlines of the Irish coast, but it is impossible to swim there on their own. The air temperature is about 12 degrees, which, of course, is not 0 or lower. But hypothermia is still deadly even in such conditions. Not everyone can stand hours in water at a similar temperature. The first rescue ship stays around 6 in the evening. The escaped bookseller laureate, having boarded the ship, sees other survivors, among them the developer Hammond, but one without a wife. After that, several more rescue ships arrive to collect all the survivors and the dead, whose bodies are floating on the surface. After that, Lusitania passengers are delivered to the nearest Irish port. Out of almost 2,000 passengers and crew members, only 764 people will survive. In the confusion and bustle, some passengers declared dead turn out to be alive, but mostly the opposite happens. Sailor Morton, who had a beautiful boat, miraculously escaped. 15-year-old Gwendolini Allen, who helped him paint a lifeboat, is found among the bodies of the dead. Nora Preterton and her son will survive. The body of her daughter, whom she gave to a stranger, will never be found, as well as the bodies of more than 600 passengers, including the famous Heir Alfred Vanderbilt. The families of many victims will never know how their relatives died. Captain William Turner manages to escape. Thanks to a life jacket, he was pulled out of the water by sailors who came to the rescue 3 hours later. All this time, the captain watched the seagulls pecking at the bodies of the dead. For the rest of his life, Turner will hate seagulls. It is the captain of Lusitania who becomes the scapegoat for the British Admiralty, one of the leaders of which at that time is Winston Churchill. However, with these accusations, the Admiralty is largely trying to clear its reputation. From intercepted messages, their Secret Service knew about the U-20 submarine, knew its approximate coordinates, and did not inform the Lusitania captain in any way until the last moment. Yes, Turner changed course a little at the last moment and moved slower than he could have, but all these decisions were not erroneous, based on the information that the captain had. And thanks to the actions of the Admiralty, there were not so many of them. The British naval authorities, aware of the potential danger, did not provide military escort for the liner, and did not send it along another safe route. Turner's innocence is eventually confirmed by a special commission to investigate the disaster. In the end, the collapse of Lusitania turned out to be due to many minor factors that led to a fatal outcome. If the ship had not initially been delayed due to the transfer of passengers from another ship, if Cunard hadn't saved money on Lusitania and she was moving faster, if the fog hadn't lifted on that fateful day on the 7th of May, if the captain of the submarine, Schweiger, had not decided to turn home earlier than planned, if the torpedo had hit a little to the left or right, it most likely would not have caused subsequent explosions. And many more of these ifs. Changing at least one of the factors would most likely have saved the lives of Lusitania passengers. At the end of the same 15th year, Captain William Turner returned to the management of the vessels of the Cunard Company. But despite the acquittal of the commission of the Semisitania, he never took the helm of a large vessel. They were all very modest ships. A year and a half later, in the Mediterranean, the ship under the command of Turner was attacked by a German submarine. 150 sailors died, the captain survived again. 6 years after the Lusitania crash, Turner retired. His son followed in his father's footsteps. He commanded a ship at the beginning of the Second World War. The ship was attacked by a German submarine, and Turner Jr. was killed. Captain Walter Schweiger received a commendation for the sinking of Lusitania. He was entrusted with the management of one of the most modern submarines. She was larger than U-20 and could carry more torpedoes. In 1917, during one of the patrols, the boat was blown up by a sea mine. None of the crew members, including Schweiger, survived.